I'd like to acknowledge the country on which NTI resides, and that is the Darwin Nation and the Wodi Wodi people, and also to pay my respect to their elders past and present. Today, we are very fortunate to have Associate Professor Pema Duddul with us. I've had the privilege of working with Pema over the last year or so in the center. And the partnership, I must say, has been filled with lots of joy, love, compassion, and equanimity. So it's great. We'll be exploring these very important qualities today. And I look forward to listening to what Pema has to share with us in terms of this evidence-based heart of secular Buddhism. So over to you, Pema.
Thanks. Can everyone hear me okay? Yep. Okay, great. All right. So just before we start, we'll pause for just a few seconds to get comfortable, to become present, and to connect with our breathing. So that we are here and now, and not entertaining thoughts of the past or the future. Okay. So as you all know, today we're talking about joy, love, compassion, and equanimity. And the subtitle is The Evidence-Based Heart of Secular Buddhism. So first I want to thank Venerable Ju Wei and Nan Tien Institute for inviting me to do this. I'm really happy to do it. And then I would like to just say a little bit about what we're doing today. So we're exploring how joy, love, compassion, and equanimity are supported by research and their practical applications in daily life. So we'll be looking at how each of the immeasurables, the four immeasurables of joy, love, compassion, and equanimity bring emotional, personal, and social benefits to us when we apply them in our daily life. And I'll be looking at some of the evidence. There's actually a vast wealth of evidence that these four immeasurables are beneficial to our well-being. I've included a reference list at the end, but I've decided because this is a conversation, I'm not going to sort of unpack each research project. I'm just going to give a general sense of what the research says and then provide a reference list at the end so you can have a look at yourselves. So first off, the subtitle is The Evidence-Based Heart of Secular Buddhism. So I just want to sort of, I suppose, answer the question, what is secular Buddhism and how is it different to non-secular Buddhism or religious Buddhism? And there are some things there on the screen. Secular Buddhism and what we might call religious Buddhism or traditional Buddhism, they have slightly different approaches to these four things, the practical application, the interpretation of the teachings, the role of faith, and the community and structure. The big one, however, is that secular Buddhism tends to be materialist in terms of it emphasizes that which can be proven by evidence, whereas traditional or religious Buddhism is open to the metaphysical, to that which cannot be known necessarily through scientific observation. I'm not going to go over this too much. I just want to sort of establish those two sort of basic differences between the two things. The interesting thing is that the four immeasurables are actually the core of both secular and religious Buddhism. So it is one of the places where we have something very much in common. So I'll just give a brief definition of these four immeasurables. Joy, which in Sanskrit is mudita, is celebrating others' happiness and success and well-being. Loving kindness or metta is unconditional goodwill towards all. Compassion or karuna is empathy and the wish to alleviate suffering. And equanimity or upekkha in Sanskrit is a balanced mind in all situations, which doesn't mean to be detached and cold. It means to be equally warm and loving, irrespective of the situation, no matter what arises in the mind, no matter what arises in our world, we're equally warm and loving. That is equanimity. It's not a cold and detached thing, equanimity. So in various traditions, the Four Immeasurables are approached in a certain order. In the Tibetan tradition, they most often start with karuna or compassion. But in my particular tradition, which is a subset of the Tibetan tradition, we start with joy. And I'll give you some reasons why in a little bit. But it's not uncommon for the approach to the immeasurables to be different depending on tradition or lineage. Some start with loving kindness, some start with compassion, some start with equanimity, actually, and in our tradition, we start with joy. So this is all sort of summaries of what the research says. So again, there's a reference list at the end. If you want to pursue the research, you can have a look at that. But basically, I've pulled out the 5 leading benefits of each of the immeasurables. There are more, but I pulled out the 5 leading ones, the ones that the research most commonly mentioned. So the first one there is increased positive emotions. So doing joy meditation is not very researched. There's not a lot of research around that. But there's been a few studies around this, and I've included them in the reference list. And they basically show that to do a mudita meditation increases positive emotions, reduces envy and jealousy. So there's one fairly strong study that shows that when we practice joy or mudita, appreciative joy, that strongly reduces our envy and jealousy. It improves social relationships, perhaps because it reduces our envy and jealousy and increases other positive emotions like joy and compassion. Interestingly, something that the research shows is that each of these immeasurables tends to give rise to the others somewhat naturally. So when we meditate on joy, loving kindness, compassion, and equanimity arise as well. So obviously improves social relationships, which we just mentioned, and then enhanced empathy and compassion. So in positive psychology, they talk about the benefits of empathy, and a lot of the research shows that actually, in fact, joy meditation is more beneficial in terms of increasing happiness, increasing compassion, increasing loving kindness than is empathy. And then obviously greater life satisfaction. And this is because joy fosters gratitude. A joyful mind is one that is content. A joyful mind doesn't want anything else. A joyful mind is in the present and happy with how things are. So that fosters gratitude and greater life satisfaction. Again, I'm just sort of covering these very briefly. We don't have a lot of time. I do want to leave a fair bit of time at the end for questions so that we can have a chat, because this is meant to be a conversation. So as I said, in the Dharma, in Buddhist teachings, there are two kinds of joy. There's mudita or appreciative joy, which we see mostly in the Mahayana teachings, in the Mahayana sutras. But then there's this other kind of joy, which is Sanskrit as priti. And we see it in the earlier sutras. So in the very early sutras, we see this concept of priti or joy. And it's one of the 7 factors of awakening. So the 7 factors of awakening are these qualities or characteristics that are required to awaken as a Buddha, to be free from suffering as well, obviously. To awaken as a Buddha, you need to be free from suffering. So joy is on the list, quite high on the list of those 7 factors of awakening. But it's a different kind of joy. So when we talk about mudita, that is joy in other people's well-being, joy in their happiness, joy in their success. But priti is non-conceptual joy. You might even call it somatic joy, or kind of joy that's experienced in the body. It's non-conceptual. So this joy is actually very important in terms of my particular lineage of Dharma or Buddhism. And I've got a quote here from one of our root teachers in our lineage. It says, "Arouse joy and rest in its natural radiance. Not only is this the heart of the path, but indeed it is the heart of awakening." And that might seem like a slightly radical statement, that joy is the heart of awakening. But if we look at the sutras, the early sutras, there is one in which the Buddha, after he has learned 2 different types of meditation, he's learned form-based meditation, he's learned formless meditation, and then he's undertaken all these austere practices, breath control, yoga, all these sort of austere things. And he has realized that none of it has actually worked, that none of it has led to a state completely free of suffering, and therefore has not led to awakening. So when he's reviewing his life and reviewing what he's done to become free of suffering and to awaken, he realizes that there was only one time in his life when he was actually free of suffering. And it was when he was a child and he was alone in the orchard outside the palace where he grew up. And he was sitting under an apple blossom tree, and he was just in a state of delight about the solitude, the quiet, the beauty of nature, sitting in the shade on a warm day. He was just in this state of joy, priti. And he naturally entered into the first yana, the first meditative yana. So the first of the progressive states towards enlightenment. So he naturally entered that state, a state that is free of suffering. So he said, that's the only time that this has happened for me. Therefore, that is the path to awakening. So the Buddha makes it clear himself that joy is a gateway, a doorway to awakening. And that's kind of a very important part of what we do at, in our Sangha. There are specific ways to do this, to practice joy, and I'll talk about those a little bit towards the end. So loving kindness or metta. So this is perhaps the one that is one of the immeasurables that's the most researched. So there's a very, very significant body of evidence that loving kindness meditation is profoundly beneficial. Again, I've pulled out just the 5 leading benefits. There are many others, but I've pulled out just these 5 for each one so that we can really get a sense of how they overlap. A lot of the benefits are similar, but also how kind of deep they are, how kind of far-reaching. So again, increased positive emotions. That one appears in almost all of the immeasurables. Reduce negative emotions, obviously. But in particular, the thing about research into LKM or loving kindness meditation shows that it is particularly effective at reducing anxiety, depression, and anger. So there's one significant study that looked solely at depression and found a very marked improvement for people with depression by simply practicing loving kindness meditation. And the interesting thing about this is that there are also some studies that show that not very much meditation is beneficial. You don't need to do years and years and years and years. A lot of the studies are based on new meditators who haven't got any experience and just doing a few sessions. And it shows that just a few sessions of meditation based on one of the immeasurables leads to long-lasting benefit. So this third one there, improve social connections. This is simply because, you know, when you're kind to others, they respond positively. It's a very simple equation. And so that improves our social connections. Enhance psychological resilience. So it's an interesting thing that, this is an interesting thing that pops up in a few of them. We are more resilient when we practice the immeasurables because we're less interested in ourselves. And so there's one particular study on joy that shows, and there's multiples for loving kindness, that these meditations actually cause us to be more accepting of life's conditions, including life's negative conditions, and more resilient in the face of difficulty, which is very interesting. And then physical health benefits. So there's quite a lot of research that shows that there are flow-on physical health benefits to practicing loving kindness meditation. They include lower blood pressure, more heart rate variability, which means when your heart adapts to the situation you're in. So for example, if you're walking down the street and a dog jumps out and barks at you, your heart sort of responds to that and goes rapid. And heart rate variability is how quickly it then returns to normal. So you go back to a point of equilibrium. And the greater the heart rate variability, that means that the more you kind of, when you get stressed or when something frightens you or when something happens, your heart comes back to normal more quickly. So this is a very positive health benefit. And then there's a number of other health benefits, including low blood pressure. And we know that long-term high blood pressure has many, many, many detrimental effects on the body. So that's just a few. And as I said, there is an overwhelming body of evidence about these things. I mean, we're at the point where when there's not a lot of research being done in this space in terms of loving kindness meditation anymore, because it's settled, it's beneficial. We know this. The research shows it very clearly. Now, another one that's quite highly researched is compassion or karuna, which is the deep empathy or the wish to relieve others' suffering. And it has, again, I've just pulled out 5 benefits, but there's more than 5. Enhanced emotional well-being. That's slightly different to the idea of positive emotions. So some of the others say increased positive emotions. This is more about how you feel about yourself and how you feel about the world. So it's an enhanced emotional well-being, reduced anxiety and depression, again, like loving kindness and meditation. Again, improved social relationships. So again, that's because if you wish to reduce the suffering of others, they respond positively to that and they treat you well in return, usually. Then decreased self-criticism and increased self-compassion. This is a really interesting one. So in our tradition, when we're doing loving kindness meditation, the traditional way, and the way it should be done, that word should, is we start with ourselves. If it's not done that way, there are some risks to it. You can experience what we call compassion overwhelm. So you can become overwhelmed. If you don't start with yourself, there can be a bit of a problem. But in a Buddhist context, rather than like a secular mindfulness context, we always start with ourselves. So, and that leads to, of course, less self-criticism, less negative self-talk, and more self-compassion. So we're more gentle with ourselves, we're more accepting of our failings, and we're more, again, we're more resilient in the face of our own challenges, personal challenges. And then again, better physical health. So this one is interesting because there's research that shows that that this particular form of meditation, compassion meditation, reduces inflammation. As we know, inflammation's a massive problem. It's the primary driver of cancer. It's the primary driver of a lot of a lot of illnesses. So reducing inflammation is always a good thing. And also, again, blood pressure, again, same as the other one. But this one's interesting, is improved immune function. So this is because, there's lots of research about why this might be the case, but we know that where immune cells are produced, it's very closely linked to cognitive thinking. So when we change the way we think, our immunity responds positively. If we have positive feelings about others, we have a stronger immune system. Okay, and equanimity. Now, there's not a lot of, again, like joy, equanimity is a little bit under-researched, but there is emerging some interesting research around this. Now, the interesting thing about equanimity is that it's one of the principal focuses of research into insight meditation. It's considered one of the things that results from mindfulness practice, equanimity. So again, just pulled out the 5 leading benefits: increased emotional stability, reduced anxiety and stress. Again, it seems to be repeated. Enhanced resilience to negative events like joy, does the same thing. And this is an interesting one: improved focus and concentration. I think this is because when we're not as reactive, so when we're not reacting to everything that arises around us, we are more in the moment and we're more able to see what's going on. We're able to be more focused and concentrated rather than dispersed, constantly dwelling on the past, anticipating the future. You know, there's much less of that. So it leads to improved focus and concentration. So equanimity is very good for us on multiple levels. And then again, better interpersonal relationships. Now, this is because if we treat everything that arises in the mind and everything that presents to us in the world with the same equanimity, and remember, equanimity is not cold and detached, it's warm and loving. So if we treat every being we meet with the same warmth and the same love, obviously our relationships will be improved because those beings will respond in kind. Even animals sense agitation, anger, hostility, and respond to a person who is gentle, kind, loving. So even animals do that, and humans are a little less evolved than animals, but they do respond usually to kindness and love and compassion. So it improves how we relate to others. I was kind of joking about humans not being as evolved as animals. Okay, so we'll talk about how to apply these things. I'm not sure what everyone's background is in terms of, have you done kindness meditation? Have you done metta meditation? Have you done mindfulness meditation? What have you done? I'm not sure. I don't know. So I'm just going to give a couple of very basic kind of tips in each of the categories. So these things, we can apply the immeasurables in our mindfulness practice. We can apply the immeasurables in our meditation practice, and we can apply them in our daily life. So I'm just going to give a couple of little tips in each of those spaces. So in terms of mindfulness, so the interesting thing about that word mindfulness is that it's not great. It's not a great translation. So the root word in Sanskrit means to remember. So they've translated that into mindfulness, to be mindful. But to remember, I think, tells us a little bit more about how to do it, how to be mindful. So to remember what, right? The Buddha's asking us to remember to be present, to be here, now, with the beings who are presenting to us, with the beings who are in front of us, rather than being somewhere up in the past, dwelling on things that are long gone and can no longer influence us if we don't allow them to, or anticipating things that may never happen, the future. So it's to remember to be present, but also to remember the core of the Buddha's teaching. So when we talk about mindfulness, we talk about being present, being in the now, although I really dislike that phrase because it's a little bit vague. But it also means to remember impermanence, to remember shunyata or emptiness, and to remember suffering, dukkha. So those are the three things we're meant to remember, the core of the Buddha's teaching. So if we're in the moment, remembering impermanence, one of my teachers is always fond of saying that a true realization of impermanence is like 90% of enlightenment. If in the moment we remember impermanence, we don't react. If someone's being hateful and mean, we remember this is completely impermanent. The minute it has passed, it's gone. Something that we say in our lineage, the past is dead. It's that really strong, like it's gone. It can no longer influence you. Also, if we remember things are empty, so they lack inherent self-existence, it means that we don't grasp so much. We're also less averse to things. It loosens up both our attachment and aversion. And also when we remember suffering, it means that when suffering happens, we're not surprised and we're not overwhelmed. It's like, oh, this is the nature of samsaric existence. Suffering happens, So we're more even. So these are the things we're meant to be mindful of. Mindful to be present, and that means to be not off in the past, anticipating the future, but also it means not to be swept up in our thoughts, which are almost always about the past and the future. To be just here now with the beings who are in front of us. All right, so that's what we remember. And then a really easy way to do that is to just connect with the breath, to just remember your breathing, connect with it, and just, remember impermanence, emptiness, suffering. This is how things are. This is already gone. It's as soon as you've paid attention to it, it's gone. It can't harm me or control me or do anything to me. So you just sort of let everything flow through. The metaphor is sometimes used as like a breeze blowing through a house with all the windows open. Like it just blows straight through, nothing stays. Or a bird flying through the sky, it leaves no trace. Everything just passes through. It's all okay. In terms of meditation techniques, so I'm going to share with you a little one that we have in our lineage, which is very simple, very easy. Again, we start with joy. In our tradition, we believe that if you start with joy, that loving kindness or love, we use the word love in our lineage because in the West, that word, even though it has the sort of romantic associations, it already covers kindness, it covers concern for well-being, it covers commitment, it covers loyalty, it covers all these things. So that's why we just use that simple Western word, love. So we consider that if you give rise to joy, love flowers naturally. From love flowers naturally compassion, the wish for beings to be free. Because when you love a being, you do not wish that being to suffer. It's very natural and simple. And then from there, because you love all beings, you wish all beings to be free of suffering, you're in a state of equanimity. So for us, the state of equanimity is almost a state of Buddhahood. It's like, complete freedom from bias and attachment, aversion and ignorance. All right, so what we do is, we call this the path of joy and ease. It's a very simple practice. So what we do is it's done normally in nature, normally with the eyes open, but you can adapt to your situation. We choose, so obviously all meditation has an object, something on which one places one's awareness. So we choose something that brings us joy as our object. So if we're in nature, it can be like a waterfall. The most common one is the open sky, because it's also a metaphor for the mind, the open sky. It can be go to the beach, sit at the beach, sit on a hilltop under a lovely tree, sit on a balcony and just look out at the sky and the clouds, a flower. Also in our tradition, images of the Buddha, and in our tradition, we very much value our teachers in our tradition, so an image of our teacher, whatever it does to evoke joy. And then we just sit with that feeling of joy for about 10 minutes. It's really very simple. So you sort of choose something that evokes joy, you place your awareness on it, and then joy arises, and then your awareness is on that itself, on the joy itself. And then what seems to happen is the joy seems to grow, but actually it's not growing because it's inherent to us, joy. The four immeasurables are our innate qualities. It's how we are naturally. So although it seems to be growing, all that's happening is actually the mind is quietening down and you're perceiving more clearly how you are in your natural state, the degree of joy you have in your natural state. So we just sit there for 10 minutes in a state of joy. Pretty, this is not appreciative joy, it's just non-conceptual, simple joy as the Buddha experienced when he was a child in nature, solitude. And then we shift from that into shamatha meditation, or what we call calm abiding meditation. We don't necessarily need to change the object from what we're looking at, but we can, if we want, then include our breathing as part of the object. And then we just sit in shamatha for another 10 minutes. So it combines the four immeasurables and the foundation of all meditation practice, which is shamatha or calm abiding. So that's it. It's really very simple. It's not a difficult technique and it's perfectly safe. So one of the interesting evolutions of meditation in the Western world is what we call trauma-informed mindfulness, right? Because we know there are a lot of people with anxiety, with panic, with trauma. This is trauma safe. So irrespective of mindfulness practices, sometimes are not trauma safe, and some forms of meditation can actually increase hypervigilance, which is not a good thing for people with anxiety and panic. But this practice is completely safe. Anyone can do this irrespective of their background and irrespective of how much meditation experiences they've had or got. Now, if you are one of these people who feels it's difficult to feel joy, the first step is to relax. And in our tradition, we relax by gazing at the sky. Just open gaze and just relax. Just let go. You're not trying to achieve anything or do anything. You're just sky gazing. That's it. Just looking at the sky and just relaxing and letting be. So that's why the image of the person there, sky gazing. All right. Now, in terms of practical tips, I'll have to wind this up a little bit because I want to give everyone time to ask questions. So what we do and what I would suggest is to make sure that you're doing your joy practice or your loving kindness meditation or your compassion meditation every single day. So the thing is, the amount of time, the research shows that the amount of time is not as important as the consistency. So if you do it every single day just for 10 minutes, that's better than doing it once a week for 7 hours. The research shows this, which seems counterintuitive, but it is the way it is. And in our lineage, this is something that we're always taught. The other thing is that to do it multiple times through the day is considered better than just once in the morning or once in the evening. So what I often do is connect with my breath at any point throughout the day and just connect with the breathing and evoke joy, sit with that just for a minute. Go into shamatha, which means to simply be calm and relaxed, and then let it go and go back to whatever you're doing. Anyone can connect with their breath and just sit in calm and ease for a minute. You know, if you do that multiple times a day, it will have a benefit. You know, over your lifetime, it will have a benefit, and a surprising benefit for how simple it is. You know, another little sort of thing, sometimes it's good to choose something that when you look at it, that reminds you, oh, connect with my breathing, relax, settle, be in the now. So a lot of people who I have contact with, I get them to choose something in their office, like the doorknob, like a photo, or even their water cup, that whenever they see it, they remember, okay, connect with the breath, relax, be present. Just little reminders. I also encourage people to print things out, like our house. I won't show you because I haven't swept today. We've got lots of little post-it notes all over the house. Relax, connect, be present, experience joy. It takes the effort out of remembering to do it, and then it becomes second nature, just second nature. Now, in terms of other people, it's always good when someone is presenting in a way that you find challenging to remember that they're exactly the same as you, even though they might be, you might think they're doing something awful or negative, or showing weakness or whatever you think they're doing. They're exactly the same as us. And so you just remember that, that's equanimity. They're exactly the same as us. In terms of Buddhism, we consider that we're all trapped in samsara. We're all trapped in this cycle of misery. And what do beings do when they're trapped? You know, when an animal is caught in a trap, it becomes instantly aggressive, you know, to the point of self-harm. This is what we're all doing. We're all trapped. We're all acting out from that suffering, that dissatisfaction, that general unease. So it's important to really just remember that. We're all the same. Everyone is in the same state of suffering, and just let go whatever your reaction is to what they're doing, because your reaction is just going to add to it. Just let them do what they're doing. You don't need to try and change what they're doing. You don't need to judge what they're doing. You don't need to intervene in what they're doing. You just let it go. Leave it be, and remember, they're trapped in samsara too. There's no blame. Whatever they do, whatever they're doing is a result of being suffering beings. Anyway, so I want to go on to some questions now, I suppose. Oh, I'll do this little summary, quick. I'm not going to go. I think I've made it clear that these four immeasurables, there's boundless research that shows that they're of value to our physical health, our mental health, and social cohesion, harmony, social harmony. So they're certainly worth doing, and they're not difficult. And the other thing is, you do not need to be a Buddhist to engage with this kind of practice. And in fact, the Four Immeasurables existed in Hinduism before Buddhism came along. And the Buddha made a statement in one of the early sutras that of everything in Hinduism, the only thing that he was keeping was the Four Immeasurables, what they call the Brahma Viharas, because they were of such immense value, you know, particularly with his own experience of finding that the only state free of suffering that he'd ever entered into up until he became fully enlightened, you know, was through joy, through one of the immeasurables. So, you know, once he had that realization, he then went and sat under the Bodhi tree and was awake within 40 days. You know, that was like the moment that he realized what he needed to do. So you don't need to be a Buddhist to do these. You don't need to be religious in any way, shape or form to do these. The research shows quite clearly that they're beneficial. You don't need a religious framework for them to be beneficial. That being said, there is emerging research that shows these immeasurables in the context of the Buddhist framework, the core Buddhist teachings, meaning impermanence, shunyata or emptiness, and the pervasive nature of suffering, but particularly how our perception fuels suffering. In the traditional teachings, they sort of say that all emotional states lead to suffering. So this idea that whatever that emotional state is, even if it feels nice, it will eventually lead to suffering, so to be aware of that. So there is research showing that if you have that core of Buddhist ideas, impermanence, shunyata, and this idea that, our perception distorts and our emotions are, not necessarily always our friends, it means that these things are stronger. The benefits are greater. So I think, what we might call corporate mindfulness or whatever, or, secular non-Buddhist mindfulness is actually not a healthy thing. And there's research showing that actually leads to narcissism and other very negative things. So we do need this core of the Buddhist teachings, whether we're secular or not, when we're practicing these things. It will make them stronger, and it also protects us from egotism, narcissism, that sort of stuff. All right, questions. So we've got 15 minutes-ish. So feel free to ask questions.
Yes, thank you very much, Pema, for this for starting this conversation with us by sharing with us some insights into the Brahma Viharas, the Four Immeasurables. I'd like to invite everyone who has a question to either raise a digital hand or to pop it into the chats, whatever is more convenient for you. Yes, Nilakshi, so simple yet so profound. That's correct. And I like the fact that Pema reorders the Brahma Viharas for us by starting with joy. It's kind of reminding us when we encounter episodes to start with rejoicing in the opportunity to manage an episode before us and to use it as an opportunity to create a better version of ourselves. So yes, Pema, I like the way that you've reordered the Brahma Viharas.
Well, I can't take credit because it's how it's done in our lineage. So not me. It's down to our teachers. Yeah.
Good. And Sylvia loves the fact too. Lovely.
So if people don't have questions, do we maybe want to have a look at the research?
There is a question
there.
I think there are questions in the chat.
Yeah, I can see some turning up here.
Yes.
So someone's asking, what would be the first way to access the immeasurables after loss of a loved one? Joy might not be so easy. So as I said, in times of grief, stress, anxiety, depression, joy might seem inaccessible. So we need to do two things. So the first thing is recognize that joy is inherent to our nature. It's an inherent quality to our nature. So it's never absent, it's just covered. So, this metaphor about the true nature of mind, which is the clear sky, which is sometimes obscured by clouds. The same is true for these qualities. They're inherent. We don't need to build them up or make them. They're there already, present. So, but they're just obscured by the clouds, which can be panic, anxiety, grief, etc. So the thing about moments like those, in our tradition, what we encourage people to do is to, number one, relax. Well, first, you need to grieve, clearly. You don't suppress grief. You don't avoid grief. You don't cover up grief. You don't pretend you're not grieving. You have to grieve. You just grieve. And grief has its own process. For some people, quick. For some people, slow. And it always looks different. But one of the important things is through that grief, remember a couple of things. Number one, joy is inherent to your nature. Number two, when we're in these difficult states, relaxation is the way to joy. So as you're grieving, without sort of trying to avoid it or evade it or cover it up with something pretty and nice, grief is a fact of life. We also take time to relax. However, that relaxation doesn't need to look Buddhist. It doesn't need to look holy or spiritual. Whatever it is that causes us to feel relaxed, that's what we do. So it might be walking in nature. It might be going for a swim. It might be jumping on a trampoline. It might be eating chocolate vegan gelato. It might be playing with a cat, playing with a dog. It might, it could be any number of things, so long as it doesn't breach what we call the ethical precepts, so it doesn't cause harm to anyone, then that's okay. That's the way to relax. And as you relax, your grief will process more readily, because grief is slowed down by avoiding it, bearing it, over dwelling on it, as well. So relaxation is really important. And then once you feel back in a stable place, then you go into the joy. I hope that makes sense. And the other thing is to remember the past is gone. The past is gone. It can't hurt you or harm you unless you import it into the moment. The past is gone. So try and remember that as well. Oh, sorry, I'm playing around with the slides without knowing it. All right, anyone have any other questions?
Pema, there are several raised hands.
I can't see them.
Oh, I'll invite them. There is Jen, your hand's raised.
Yeah, thank you for the talk. It was great. I had a question about how one would sort of communicate to non-Buddhists about these sort of things. So imagine, I have a sort of non-religious friend and I tell him about all this. And then he says, well, I understand what you say, that all these exercises, all these sort of spiritual exercises are good even outside of a Buddhist framework, and they're even better within a Buddhist framework. But if I'm sort of thinking about a religion, I have Christians telling me, that all these, Christian practices are good within a Christian framework, and all these Muslims telling me and Sikhs telling me. And so what sort of special reason is there to pick Buddhism as a sort of tradition to practice in, as opposed to any other religious tradition?
Okay, so the first thing is all of the great faith traditions of the world have similar attitudes. They may not use the same words or the same practices, but there are very similar kind of attitudes. What I would suggest is that Buddhism, secular Buddhism, doesn't have to be religious at all. It is like a philosophy in the same way that any of the Greek philosophies are, and in the West, people who, whether they're Christian or not, they're often quite happy to apply like Socratic thought or Platonic thought or whatever to their life. And actually we do, because a lot of that was imported into Christianity anyway. So what I would emphasize actually the evidence, the research base. So, but the other thing is, I don't know if the Buddha cared about whether or not we were Buddhists. Buddha cared that we were free of suffering, and that should be our concern. So that's why I think I am a religious Buddhist. I have faith and devotion, and I do practices that are faith-based, devotion-based. But I see the value of secular Buddhism to the West, in particular, but also to the modern East and the North and the South. So I would just focus on the evidence base, the references at the end of this slide. If you want the slides, I'm happy to show them. Send them to you. I would just focus on the evidence. And the thing is, a philosophy can be very valuable irrespective of your religious tradition, but some people are just very closed and you have to accept that. And so you just focus the secular aspect. Kindness is not a uniquely Buddhist concept. In Christianity, they would call it charity, and also in Islam, It's not unique. Kindness, compassion, these are not unique to Buddhism, but we have a framework for engendering them in our lives and connecting the taming of the mind to them. That's the unique thing that Buddhism has. All the research about the benefits of meditation and mindfulness, I mean, that's also, the research is in. It's profoundly beneficial, whether you're a Buddhist or not. But I would also suggest that everything except shunyata or emptiness is universal. Impermanence, the distorted nature of our perception. This is, even neuroscience has pointed out now that what we call the self doesn't exist. It's fabrication. Buddha said that, you know. Our emotions are profoundly impermanent. They don't abide anywhere. Neuroscience shows us that. I mean, the science backs the Dharma up in a way that some of the stuff from other faith traditions is not backed up, you know. So I would emphasize the science and not try to convert anyone to Dharma, to Buddhism, because why? If you want them to be free from suffering, it doesn't matter what their faith is. Just make them happy. Does that make sense? I think I've over-answered that question because I hear it a lot.
Oh, no, that's very helpful. Thanks very much for your answer. I'll probably email you for the slides later on.
My email's at the end of the slide. I'll show you that in a minute. Oh, someone just put it in there, that email address in there. Any other questions?
Earlier on, Carlo and Karen had a hand up. Do you have any question or comments?
Yeah, I had a question. What's your view as far as with different traditions approaching the Four Immeasurables? They may start with loving kindness first, or equanimity even first. I've heard these. So from a practitioner's view, what's your view as far as approaching whichever one would be the most accessible in the state one's in as one starts one's practice? Or do you really kind of adhere to a strict, progression? Yeah.
Okay, so in the sutra where the Buddha expounded the Four Immeasurables, he didn't give an order. So he expounded it. He did, they came in an order, but he wasn't saying it must be this one first and then this one and then this one. It was simply listing them in the traditional way they're listed and talking through what each one does. So he clearly in his experience, in his personal experience, found joy to be the gateway for him. That being said, in the Mahayana tradition, the focus is on compassion. So karuna, compassion, is usually where they start. And as commonly, loving kindness is where they start. But then in the Tibetan tradition, there's a very strong tradition of starting with equanimity. For example, I think, and even inside Tibet, there are different versions, like Longchenpa, a saint from the 13th century in Tibet. He had his own order of things. And there are reasons why these things happen. But in people's personal experience, they need to start where they can. There's this interesting phrase in Dharma, start where you are. So you start where you can. So in our tradition, the reason joy is first is because it's easiest. It's fairly easy. It doesn't, because love can be quite mixed because there's always attachment, and then there's loss and all this stuff mixed up with love. And then compassion can lead to overwhelm if it's not, selfless. So for us, joy is the easiest and it's the most safe. It's risk-free. There's no real risk unless people confuse joy with ordinary pleasure, which it is not that. So we always start with joy because for us, we feel that joy leads to love. When a joyful mind naturally loves others, it's in a state of delight, so it loves others. And then when you love others, you don't want them to suffer. So naturally compassion arises then, and then when the more and more your love and compassion grow, it encompasses all sentient beings. And that's equanimity. You no longer want any being to suffer at all. And also because joy provides gratitude. And there's a huge amount of contentment and gratitude. There's a huge amount of research about the power of gratitude as well in positive psychology. I think it's probably the most researched thing in positive psychology, gratitude, you know, and empathy, second probably. So we start there with joy, but there's no rule. There is a vast amount of research about loving kindness and compassion meditation, not much about joy. But what we do see in the research about joy is it has surprisingly widespread, broad scope. For example, in research around obsessive compulsive disorder, which I haven't included in my reference list, there's research that shows that people who are doing exposure therapy, you know, it's not very effective to overcome their obsessive compulsive disorder unless they combine it with joy. And then it's very powerful. They're able to overcome their obsessive compulsive disorder through this joyful exposure therapy. It's very interesting how joy settles and calms the mind. Yeah. I hope I've answered your question. I'm not sure if I have.
Yes, thank you. Just another point on that. I've also come across that when we do these practices, we can apply a different object, like people who we like. After first clearing ourselves, then directing it to people we like, then to people who we're indifferent to, and then even those that we dislike. But not an intentional dislike, but where there's that type of energy happening in the organism. And so the practice can be taken further. And if you could comment on that, where one challenges one's attitude to more difficult situations that one encounters in life, on the meditation cushion, you challenge there to then liberate on the spot, so to speak. And I've also found there's an expression of joy practice where one had the joy as an antidote to envy, related to the having joy in other people's success and achievement. Because often people will have a sense of envy at others' prosperity and well-being, and this is this negative emotional vibration that can be purified through the meditative practice, in particular joy. Could you comment on those two things?
Yeah, sure. So traditionally, we start with any of these four immeasurable meditations, we start with ourselves. Then we go on to what we call near loved ones, so people we love. Then we go on to neutral, so acquaintances, people who are kind of neutral, we don't really feel much about them. Then we go on to enemies. This is the standard way of doing loving kindness meditation and compassion meditation and equanimity meditation. It's not usually, and also joy meditation to a degree. So we usually start with ourselves, then go on to near loved ones, or what they call close loved ones, then friends, then acquaintances, then neutral, then enemies. So that is the normal process that's the traditional method of moving through it. So that another name for the four immeasurables is the four boundless qualities. And when they say boundless, they mean they're not restricted to yourself and the ones you love. It's open to all beings. So that is the traditional way. Now, in our lineage, and also they all have an antidote. They're all an antidote to something as well. So obviously, joy is a traditional antidote to envy and jealousy. That's its traditional opposite. So for example, equanimity is antidote to bias, love is an antidote to hate, etc. So they all have an antidote that they remedy. So that's quite traditional. But in our lineage, we don't move through those stages in a conceptual, concerted way. We just settle, because our lineage is very much pared back, simple, and let everything unfold naturally. So we sit in joy, and then love evolves naturally, and then it will move through those processes. You know, love for oneself, love for one's close family and friends, then, neutral, then enemies. It will just move through that naturally. So our idea is that we simply let its natural state unfold. But in other traditions that have a different view, they feel that you need to cultivate each of these components, right? And for us, that can be kind of stressful and it can be kind of overwhelming. So we let it unfold naturally in its own time, which it will do, So that's my attitude on those two things.
Thank you.
Sorry, I just saw someone I knew.
Sorry. Thank you, Pema. There are 2 questions in the chat, and we have 4 minutes. So Jamie has a question around, can we care for all beings, wanting them to get what they need without necessarily liking everyone on a personality level? And Robin has a question about, I find the words, the past is dead, extremely helpful in letting go. However, when caught up in anxiety, it can feel like the past is never really dead. So how would you address this? Could you try and take us through these 2 questions in the remaining 4 minutes?
Yeah. Okay. So Jamie, yes, we can. Do you want more of an answer than that? Okay. I know, Jamie. So I'm being a little bit flippant. So when we're parents, we do everything we can, even a parent of animals, we do everything we can to care for those in our care, even if from time to time they're absolute little monsters. We love our children irrespective of the personality traits they display, and that's why Buddhism often uses this image of the mother as the kind of ultimate bodhisattva, the ultimate caring being, because a mother isn't a mother's love isn't altered by the personality traits of the children or the bad behavior they display. The mother understands that, at the core, this being is beautiful and perfect, So that's what we do. We remember their Buddha nature. Even though on a personality level, we might think, oh, get out of my face. We remember their Buddha nature, which is that in their nature, not in their display or how they behave or what they say or do, but in their nature, in their fundamental essence, they are the same as the Buddha. So we remember that, and that helps us to do what we need to do for sentient beings, even though they are manifesting really negative behaviors. But that being said, a part of compassion is to have healthy boundaries for oneself, to make sure that one isn't harmed when one's acting in compassion. So healthy boundaries are a compassionate act for oneself and for others. So that's that. Number 2, Robin. So the only way the past can influence the present or the future is because there's an illusion of a continuum of mind. That continuum, that is an illusion though. There is no stable mind from moment to moment. In each moment, there's a new mind. It arises every moment anew. So every moment anew, it arises, but it looks almost exactly the same as the previous moment of mind because it imports all that stuff from the past, right? And projects that onto the future. What we need to do is sort of break that importation process. How do we do that? Through joy, through love, through compassion, through equanimity. But be aware, the mind, the dualistic mind, imports stuff from the past that has, there's no license or permit to import that. It just does it. So we need to put in place a restriction. No, I'm not importing that. And it literally does require, to some degree, a decision, an action. No, not bringing that with me. You need to unpack your bags. So, but you don't have to sort of focus on every single problem or every single anxiety or every single panic. You just focus on joy. Love will then come, compassion will come, equanimity will come. And in doing that, sort of the side effect is that the past weakens and you cease to import that into your present, So, but it's really important to understand the mind is not a stable, permanent entity. It arises anew in each moment because of causes and conditions, right? But it looks exactly like the previous one because there's been no intervention. You have to make an intervention so that the mind will be different, so that the past will no longer matter. And that intervention is these four immeasurables, you know, in this tradition: joy, love, compassion, equanimity, and calm guiding meditation and mindfulness. Those are the interventions, you know. There's no reason for us to unpack the past. Therapy is very healthy and good, right? But that should be like a second thing. The first thing is our meditation practice and our practice with the immeasurables. That's how we do it. It seems like that's impossible, that won't happen, but it does work. Trust me.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Pema. Time seems to fly. I'm afraid there are still questions. I'm sorry, Alison, I may not be able to get to your question today. I have to be respectful of everybody's time. We've promised that this will be an hour-long conversation series. So please join me in thanking Pema for sharing his practice, his research, and his insights of how the intervention of the four immeasurables can be useful in our lives. And continuing on this conversation next week, same time on the 31st of July at 1 o'clock, we welcome Carlo and Karen Chernicki to discuss with us how we could balance everyday life with spiritual practice. And as I've put into the chat, if you would like our recording, if you would like the PowerPoint, or if you have further questions, please do write to us at hbc@nantien.edu.au. Pema will be watching out for your email and responding to you. Is that right, Pema?
Yes, if you say it's true, it's true.
Well, thank you everyone for your delightful presence today. We look forward to seeing you again next Wednesday, same time.
Thanks, everyone.